All right. Welcome to we're calling this the January CEX, hence my wonderful sign behind me. And why are we calling it the CEX? It's an all new kind of approach to CEX this year because we all have to try things completely different. What we did was we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but let me just tell you that we blew up the benchmarking study this year so that we could help all of us navigate this incredible time that we're in. We know that we have to make some changes. We've made changes and we know we got to make some more changes. So we decided to make the change with the CEX format, bust this out into 3 90-minute sessions and have an opportunity for us to have some good conversation and workshop how do we use the data. So super excited to see you all here. What I'm going to do is ask you all in chat to talk about, because if we don't know what our goals are, sometimes it's hard to know that we've reached them. What's one new thing that brings you hope in this new year, right? What's one thing that brings you hope in this new year? And look, this could be related to your chapters. It could be related to your personal life. But what are you going to build on? What's that energy that you're going to bring to the new year that's going to allow you to make changes and allow you to really reach the goals that you have? So let's talk about what are some of your goals. I love that. A coordinated tech resource for our chapters, clarity and objectives. Yes. Clarity to make those changes. I love it. I love this. Underrepresented voices as stakeholders. Nice. Healthier chapters. I love that terminology, healthier. That's cool because that really gets to think about, it's not that everybody has to be a star. To opportunities for new projects. I love that. Somebody's adding to their membership team. Yeah. That's awesome. Building on the momentum of moving out of the survival mode. Yes, I love that. That is perfect. Okay. Starting with the why, making our goals more streamlined and data-based. I love that. Chapter peer-to-peer mentoring. Yes, Michelle. And we have to do that. There's only 1 or 2 of us in any particular organization too often. So keep those coming because it's that combination of the hope and this visioning forward that allows us to have the energy to make changes that we know we need to, our chapters are going to be happy about it. All right. We're going to be together for 3 days. I just want you to know to please, let's keep things fun and light. If you hear a data point and you like it, give us a thumbs up or an applause. Use your emojis. Yes, use your emojis as well. And just let's just keep smiles on our face. Okay. So I always love to do this part, which is a quick shout out behind the scenes. You're going to be hearing a lot from Peter. So Peter and I make up, of course, the wonderful Mariner team. But on the other side of the team, which are really, really the folks that just make so much of this come true, is Paige, lovely once again on all of the design elements. Sarah, who is making sure that we've got a space to meet, and then she makes sure that we get everything afterwards. And of course, our very own Mark Prevost. Say hello, Mark.
Hi, everybody. This is awesome.
Mark. So your hosts, of course, are Mark. Tell us about Billhighway real quickly.
So Peg, I got to tell you, this is my favorite workshop of all the different workshops that we do. This is my favorite one, and I'll tell you why. We say chapter performance and benchmarking as if it's one phrase, and I get that, right? But it's at the very core of what the Billhighway solution does, right? So chapter performance, right? We have a solution that was built for the purpose of helping chapters perform better, right? And then as they use our solution, what do? We give data back to headquarters, right? So if you're an association that relies upon your chapters to help deliver your mission to your members, how can we help these volunteer leaders do their job better, more efficiently, easier, right? Things when it comes to, banking, accounting, managing events, filing 990s, engaging with members, right? I love the heart of the volunteer. I'll get emotional if I talk about it, right? But would that the world today, our society, had more people that had the heart of a volunteer. Right? So how can we help those people just maximize how their chapters operate? And then while we're doing that, how can we give visibility back to headquarters on all the data around which members are engaging, which members aren't engaging, which sometimes is more important than those that are, right? How are chapters performing? How many events are they having? How many members are coming to their events? How do we benchmark them against their peers, not just within the association itself, but also within the industry, so that we as CRPs, right, can help everybody perform better. And so I love this for so many reasons, but mostly because it's at the very heart and passion of what Billhighway is.
Thank you. And you know what I love, Mark, is you brought up the focusing on the volunteers. And part of what we did this year, and Peter's going to tell us more about this, is we spoke to chapter leaders and got some really good intel from them. So
indeed.
Yeah. So the other, Peter and I, you know, we're passionate about how do we make chapters do the best that they can do, but more importantly, how do we meet members' needs? And so we are super excited to be here today. What is today? Well, I'm going to start in just a moment, tell you what our 3 days is, our roadmap, so you kind of have a sense. And if you have to pop in and out, you'll get a good idea of when you should pop and when you shouldn't. Then we're going to have Peter come on. He's going to talk about the big themes from the benchmarking study. He's going to give you some numbers. Don't go to sleep. These are important numbers. And then we're going to talk about some lessons learned so that we can, of course, let those drive us into the next day. So 3 days, day one. How do associations view chapters? The survey includes CRPs, CEOs, and chapter leaders. So we're going to take a look at the story of chapters in this moment of time from all three perspectives. We're going to build on that by saying, okay, how do we then use the data and the insight to begin to help us look to the future and build dashboards that will make a difference to get to the future, not be stuck in the past. And finally, and this is, I think, going to be my most favorite day, and that is, how do we tell the story of chapters? You got to tell the story to a lot of different kinds of people, from the CEO to the chapter leader to the member. We're going to talk about storytelling on day 3. So I think it's going to be we've got a great 3-day setup. If you have to leave early, come late, or miss for some reason the day, worry not. As you know, we are recording it and we will get the recordings to you, and happy to follow up with you on anything that doesn't make sense. So don't worry about that. We will start at the beginning of the day with a quick recap of the previous day. So if you left early, you'll at least know how we ended it. And if you have any questions in between, you're just going to holler to us. So now I'd like to give you just a moment. Now we've talked about the agenda. I'd like to give you just a moment in your silence. I'm going to give you about 45 seconds. I'd like you to reflect on what's a networking goal for these 3 days, what's a learning goal for these 3 days. And the reason why I ask you to do this, and I think that this is important, is we have to sort of set our sense of what are we looking for so that we can actually find it. And if we don't deliver it to you, then you can ask the right questions to get what you need. So 45 seconds, write down, if you want, share it in chat, networking goal, learning goal. Thank you, Anne, for kicking off sharing in the chat. keep sharing, because when you share, that's how you make sure that you get the answer that you need. All right, so keep thinking. If I'm interrupting you, apologies. Want to keep us moving today. And I'm going to ask you to do the Zoom reaction button. Did you participate in the 21-22 chapter benchmarking? Did your association participate in it? Give me a thumbs up if you did. Thumbs up if you did. Let's see. I'm looking to see my thumbs up, people. Yes, cool, cool. Very good. All righty. Neat. If you didn't, fear not. We had a pretty good representation of associations, so I am sure you will find yourself in this. Now, with this, I am going to stop my share, and I'm going to introduce to you the person who is going to take us all the rest of the way. And hang on one second here, guys. Take us the rest of the way and talk the numbers. Peter.
Hey, okay. Well, we're all excited about the numbers, right? They just get us going. But actually, it's not the numbers that are fascinating this year. It's the letters between the numbers that I think are the most interesting of the entire report. So let's talk about what's different about this year as opposed to the previous benchmarking reports that we've done. And again, we tried to capture many of the numbers from previous reports this year, but we wanted to look at things a little differently. We wanted to take a different perspective, get a different lens on the world as it is today, because it's a little different. So first of all, we brought in a whole lot of other folks into this conversation. We had a wide range of CRPs and CEOs, first time, did some focus groups with Jeff DeCania with some CEOs, did some conversations with some CEOs. We also did a survey of chapter leaders. We had 7 associations, and we had, I think, about 700 chapter leaders from quite a few, I can't remember what the number of chapters was, but quite a few folks who participated on the chapter leader side. So we're trying to get that triad of perceptions and perspectives to help us better understand what are the chapters doing that's working and what could be better. We also had a variety of focus groups. We had conversations with lots of people. And we also, Peggy and I and Sarah and the folks at the Billhighway, we really reached back into our client portfolio and looked at all the work we've done for the last 20 years, quite frankly, with associations and their chapters, and said, there's a lot of good data inside of that. We have to look at that and see how that helps us better understand and share what we've learned in this survey. And so we integrated all these focus groups and the surveys and the client experience. And we really used this body of knowledge to take a hard look at the assumptions we make about what's working and what's not, and what we should do about it. And many times, and you'll hear me say this several times throughout the presentation today, we keep trying to fix what is broken, as opposed to saying, maybe it's broken because it doesn't work. Maybe we need to think about this in an entirely different way. And of course, that really tends to raise questions. Data always raises more questions than it gives us answers. And this year, it really raised a lot of questions. And last but not least, and I think the most important idea that we want to focus on today, is how can we build on the bright spots? How can we take a look at what's working well and see how we can replicate that across the system, rather than constantly trying to reach back and fix the things that don't seem to be quite right. So let's get into the numbers. I'm going to very briefly walk through who played and what the respondent pool looked like, but that's the least interesting part of the conversation. So we'll sort of whip through this. It'll be a little bit of a fire hose. But before I get there, I want to talk about 3 big themes that we feel work their way through the entire report. And the first one is this issue of structure. And as we all saw and constantly see over the last 20 years, that we are struggling in many cases with a 20th century model of organization in a 21st century world. And a lot of times that doesn't work too well. And we've also, particularly in the last 2 years, seen that time zones rather than geography have defined how our chapters relate to each other and to the headquarters. And that has really changed a lot of the way that people look at things. And while we are trying to get back to, and we'll get back to some level of in-person, I suspect that we've learned some lessons here that will not go away, and that the hybrid model, the attempt to really keep that virtual world alive, will continue. We also looked really hard at volunteers, and we saw again that a lot of times our leaders struggle with the administrivia of chapter leadership and don't get to spend the time they should and the time they're passionate to spend on the mission of the organization and serving the members. We also learned, and especially in the last 2 years, that good leaders still count. The right people make all the difference in the world, regardless of the resources, the finances, all the support they may have. If you have good people, they can make little things work really well. If you don't have good people, you can give them all the money, all the support in the world, and they can't get it done. And of course, that also leads into a conversation we'll have about what we call the farm team paradox, where we see a lot of our national leaders, our national board members, for example, coming up through the chapter system. And what kind of habits do they bring to that seat? What kind of perspective and paradigms did they bring to that conversation that make it difficult for them to really become the strategic leaders one needs at the national board table? And of course, last but not least, and the most important part of this conversation, is about the value that chapters create. And everybody, the chapter leaders, the CEOs, the CRPs, everybody agrees that there is a valid purpose for a local presence. We need to have a local presence in many, many cases. But there's a big maybe sitting around whether or not that local presence is actually getting the job done. And of course, that ties back to what do we know? Where's the data that tells us good or not so good? And last but not least, we took a look this time at the level of support that headquarters is giving to their chapter systems, and the perception that the CRPs, i.e. you guys, the perception that that support is actually making a difference. And that also got a, not really sure. In fact, you'll find some of these numbers perhaps a little making one uneasy. And that's okay, because this is, again, forcing us to take a hard look at our assumptions and make sure that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. So let's take a minute now, and I can bring this slide back up after I get to this next one. But I'd like everybody to hop into some breakouts for a few minutes and think about these three areas: structure, value, and volunteers. And tell me what resonates for you. How, if at all, have you changed? How have your chapters changed? What's happened? What have your groups done in the last couple of years? And really trying to look at structure and volunteers and value. So I'm going to put that slide back up, and Sarah is going to drop you into some breakout rooms and just take a few minutes. Let's say we'll have 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to chat with each other and introduce yourselves to each other. And try to get some idea of what people have experienced and what do you think of these ideas around structure, volunteers, and value. And I'll put that slide back up, and Sarah can send you on your way. Sarah?
Yep, on it.
Everybody take a deep breath.
There's Wes Carr. My goodness. Wes Carr with, listen to me, I'm calling him Wes because he loves Wesley, but I'm just giving him the grief. You at your ends. That is awesome.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
It's good to see you. Oh, there's Crystal. Good to see you, Crystal.
Hi, Peggy. I've missed you. I was talking to you regularly and I haven't seen you in a while. So it's nice to see you.
I know. I'm like, woo. And there's Diana. Excellent. And I think I just saw April. There we go. I love when people coming in and it's like this wonderful, everything is just popping in. So good to have all of you back with us. We got a couple more rooms starting to open up here. Peter, why don't you go ahead and get us started again?
So welcome back, everybody. I'd just like to take a few minutes and hear from anybody who has something they heard that surprised them, perhaps an assumption they questioned, a question they assumed. Anybody want to share anything from the breakouts?
Feel free to use chat if you don't want to use your voice.
I'll just throw something out again. It was a very brief discussion, but I think our group kind of recognized that, as membership organizations, as associations, we have to really show the value to our volunteers, because I use the term, I've said it before, that we are maybe number 8 or 9 on the list of on priorities, life priorities. But with the last year and a half, 2 years, people's life priority list has kind of gotten bungled up, jumbled up. And so, again, from my perspective, I think the group agreed that we all really just need to, as an organization, show that value and make it worth their while to continue to contribute and volunteer. I guess that's, I'm sort of snapshot of what we discussed, but that's my input.
Yeah. Anessa?
So I'm curious, Wesley, if does that influence your structure? Right. So if you were having a hard time getting volunteers at the regional level or state level, do you change your structure so that it represents maybe like a wider geographic space to have, to be able to pull from a larger volunteer group?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a great question. I got to admit, I am recently, as Peggy kind of referenced, I'm recently moved to a new association. So I'm really learning the structure of the way things are working right now. So it's hard for me to kind of, respond to that. I think my comments and where I was coming from was primarily, what I had seen. I'd been with my previous organization for almost 15 years. And in the pandemic, I saw a big difference, right? So I'm going to reserve, making those comments about my existing association till I'm really able to kind of make that comment. Does that make sense? I hope you understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've got a small comment to that with the structure piece of it. I think one of the things that we looked at was the different ways that we need to train our volunteers moving forward, and like what pieces and how do we change those training between, micro learning to can we be in person to different types of virtual things, because different times of years that our volunteers could participate or not participate depending on, where we were on their list and what was going on, and being able to flip quickly. So I think that did change our structure of just communicating with them and how we were training them and giving them different options to get up to speed with things.
Kelly, that's a great point. And right now, Peggy and I are involved in another research project with the ASA Foundation, looking at what makes an effective volunteer. And this issue of effectiveness is really important when it comes to chapter leadership, obviously. But the other area that we're exploring in this survey, and the survey is rolling out, I think, tomorrow to association staff, is the extent to which the changes we've seen from the last 2 years, the extent to which they're going to stick. And that's an interesting question for us to get our heads around, because I think there has been some shift. It's not that we will stop doing what we used to do, but I think we're going to keep doing a lot of the new things we've learned to do. And that could fundamentally change our volunteer management models. Anybody else have a observation, an aha, a question that they can?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well. Similarly to Kelly, as we did do a kind of restructure from the volunteer side, but also internally from a staff side as well. So we had like recent shifts, and one of our, I guess, really great trailblazing CEOs moved on. And so our COO, who was really focused in on the really kind of tactical details, is now our CEO. So he was able to kind of have the vision of the kind of roadblocks that we had. And so whereas we had like a whole programs team and then an events team, we've now shifted into having divisions. And so now we're really excited because we have an entire division that's going to be our engagement office. And so whereas my membership kind of department was under the dirt and we were fighting for like, hey, like we have all of this great information, our members want to talk to us. Mm-hmm. Our CEO realized that and really shifted and say, hey, we're going to go guns a blazing. So our events is where our members experience. This is how we engage. And so really being able to develop philanthropic or donations or even our chapters and how we even approach like our community engagement at a local level, we will now be building out those individuals and the people to build that structure to support what's already happening and help it flourish, rather than it was kind of the opposite of coming from a top-down approach. So really paying attention to having that information, and then our programs team turning into a research and innovation team is now they'll be collecting data and analytics and being able to kind of share within each other. So again, a huge, beautiful shift. We're so excited to be able to put bodies to where we know our biggest roadblocks are.
Congratulations. That sounds exciting. Okay, well, let's move on. I'm going to go back to our presentation here, and so we're going to crunch some numbers, just a few, just to give you some sense of the pool from which we drew our findings in this report, and then we'll really get into talking about what we think some of these findings might mean. And that's going to be the much meatier and more, I think, interesting part of the presentation. So let's whale through these guys as quickly as we can. And let me see if I can get my computer to pay some attention to me. There we go. Okay, the numbers. Well, we had a bunch of respondents. We had 100, 150, something like that, 200. I'm not sure what the exact number was. Associations who participated in the survey. No significant difference from past surveys with respect to the makeup. Mostly individual member IMOs, individual member organizations. Average of 42,000 members. Median around 15,000 members for the participating associations, average of 74 chapters, mostly state associations for the participating members. The relationship between the chapters and the national organization or the parent organization or headquarters was, again, very similar to what we've seen in the past, the majority being separately incorporated and chartered, then some wholly owned subsidiaries. So that's the group that's really sort of tied directly to the parent organization. And then 20%, about a fifth, were what we call independent affiliates, where they could exist without the national or the parent or headquarters organization. With respect to the membership and dues, we had, I think 2/3 of them had a contingent membership, and you can't be a member of one without being a member of the other. They had about 1/3 had unified dues, where the member gets one dues bill, not two different dues bills. And in about 2/3 of the cases, the headquarters collects the dues. If we look at the operating budgets of the chapters themselves, the median operating budget was about $50,000. The average was about double that. We obviously had some large chapters in the pool, and we do find that in those of you who've been around chapters for a long time, you have chapters that are running on basically on fumes, and some chapters they have a suite on Wall Street, and about a quarter of the chapters out there had paid staff, and again that there's that paid staff could be anybody from a person who's retired and has nothing better to do, or whose spouse kicked them out of the house and said, "Leave me alone. I married you for lunch, or for better or worse, not for lunch." But sometimes they have paid staff who are association professionals. And as CRPs, you understand there's usually a big difference in the relationship between the headquarters organization and the chapters based upon the type of staff they have. What was interesting when we looked at the financials was that we generally found that small chapters are as likely to be successful as large chapters are likely to fail. And that was particularly true in the last couple of years, where, and we'll talk about this later, good leadership really made the big difference. It was the leaders, not the resources, that made the difference in whether or not the chapters survived what was a very difficult time for everybody. And if we looked at what the chapters do, well, they do the same things they've always been doing. Education, networking, advocacy were the three biggies. And that's, there were no surprises there in the types of activities in which they were engaged. But what we did do differently this time was we took a look at how many things they were doing, and we tried to do a rough estimate of the count of the different types of activities they were playing with. And the number we came up with is about 10. And you've probably heard Peggy and me say many times that sometimes we find that chapters are trying to do too many things. and they're doing lots of things, but not doing them very well. And we try to get people to focus on, let's pick the top 1, 2, or 3 things that really make a difference, that we can do well, that are going to drive the mission and serve the member. Let's focus on those things. So that'll be a message that I think needs to be shared throughout the community broadly. Then we asked this is where things begin to get interesting, because we asked the CRPs, i.e. you guys, what's the impact of the chapters? What are they doing that's making a difference? And they identified a number of things that they felt were being done reasonably well. Giving the brand a local presence was one, providing volunteer opportunities, extending service to members who can't attend national events. Was an area that was focused on. And again, we saw with the last 2 years that chapters doing virtual events really changed that conversation substantially. And then, of course, increasing overall member value. And these are important things, but the real eye-opener was when we really looked at, okay, how effective were they at doing these things? And there the scores were, well, less than thrilling. On a 5-point scale, the highest score was giving your brand a local presence. Now, 3.5 out of 5 is what? That's a 70. That's like a C. And if we looked at the average of all these things put together, it was about a 2.9, which is a 58. Even if you take out the generating additional income for headquarters, the 1.7 there, the score was still relatively low. So there is some degree of skepticism on the part of the CRP community with respect to the extent to which the chapters are being effective. And again, I would never question the passion and the energy that chapters often bring to the conversation, but we do have to take a hard look of whether or not those calories are being burned well, if they're creating heat, if they're generating change and moving things forward in a positive way. And of course, related to that, we saw the challenges that typically have been plaguing us and have already come up today. There's a lack of volunteers, and that lack of volunteers leads to leadership succession challenges, which in turn leads to volunteer burnout. And there we are. Then we ended up with low performing chapters because poor succession, lack of volunteers. Then we have limited or no programming. We lose members. That's when things don't work too well. So this is where, again, Peggy and I are saying, maybe we need to pause a minute here and say, are we doing the right things the right way? Do we keep trying to fix the old things? Maybe we should stop trying to fix the old things. And as Brianne said, maybe we need to do a reshuffling of the deck here entirely and really reevaluate the processes we have in place. So we also looked at how the association community is supporting their chapters. And again, as I mentioned before, we've generally found that strong leadership makes all the difference in the world, regardless of the level of support. But when we looked at the specific things that the chapters are doing and the associations are doing to support their chapters, they were very similar to what we have seen in the past. So we have some level of database management. We have some level of dues collection, startup kits, and dues invoicing. But when we look at the numbers behind them, what we see are, again, what we've seen in the past. When we drilled down on these areas, for example, database management, we found that of the 70% of the respondents who say we provide database management services for our chapters, well, in reality, in 60% of the cases, that was simply saying they have access to the database so they can look up their memberships. They can look up their members. They can download a list. They can download mailing labels, something like that. And of course, the other issue that we often find when we found this also in our conversations with chapter leaders is while many of these services may be available, and I'm sure you guys see this as well, even if you make it available, that doesn't mean that the chapter leaders are actually using any of these services. And in many cases, they are not. So that's a question we need to ask ourselves when we build a product or a service to support our chapter leader community. Not only is it worth doing, but will they take advantage of it? We also looked at the developmental side of those resources. And again, we saw what you shouldn't be any surprise to everybody. Most people have some kind of a web portal where chapter leaders can go and get all kinds of documents and forms and figure out how to do stuff. We have webinars that we run on a regular basis to try to explain to the chapter leaders what they should and shouldn't be doing. And we have a leadership conference of some flavor or other. And most folks have a leadership conference. And Peggy and I have participated in many of them. The difficulty, as we often find, is that chapter leaders, and I think Wes brought this up, for chapter leaders, we're 8 or 9 or 10 on their life list. And so, they're paying attention somewhat, but often, as Reggie Henry will say, we need to find a way to be present at the moment of need and really decide what it is that they need when they need it. And
Yeah,
that's why.
Peter, hang on just a second. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I just really love what Kelly put in the chat just a few moments ago. She's zeroing in on what you're saying. They were doing pre-recorded micro learning videos as part of this. And that's something you have mentioned before. So sorry to interrupt your flow there, but I wanted to shout out to her comment.
Well, that ties right into this notion that, and we've seen a slight increase in the use of learning management systems. And learning management systems are all about, I need to know this now. You can teach me this in November, but I may not use it until April, by which time I've forgotten everything you taught me. Whereas if it's in an LMS where I can use it asynchronously, I can use it when I need it, that's when I'm going to be able to learn the most from it. And I think that's where we need to figure out with our chapter leaders, how do we help them develop muscle memory by doing things, not by reading about that thing, whatever it may be. And if we can be present when they're actually doing what it is that we want them to do, that's going to be much more valuable than hitting them once up with, oh, here's the book of stuff you need to know, knowing that they're going to forget that pretty quickly.
So just curious, if anybody if you could just put in chat, if you're using the LMS or if there's something that you could share or show, let us know, because we'd love to do some follow up with you. I think sometimes seeing how other folks are doing things is the way we learn best. So put in chat if you are using an LMS, as Peter has suggested.
Yeah. So what you see here is a heavy reliance on what I'm going to call, in particularly webinars and dedicated leadership conferences, real-time interaction with the chapter leaders. The website portal is present at the moment of need, but often that's like many websites. The leaders have a hard time finding what they want when they need it. And I think the more we can look at some of the more advanced technologies, learning management systems, things like that, to really help people develop that muscle memory at the time that they're doing whatever it is they're doing, will benefit from that. And I'm also going to be curious to see how the mentoring process is going to continue to work in the future. It's always been fairly low on this list. And sometimes, however, having somebody you can call up is one of the most powerful learning tools that we can have out there. And that may be a place for us to explore going forward. So the real question then, when we looked at all these different functional and developmental resources we're providing for our chapter leader community, what difference is it making? We burn a lot of calories doing these things. Peggy and I appreciate that, but we burn a lot of calories doing this. Is it making a difference? And that's where we began to talk to the CRPs about chapter effectiveness. And so we basically said, okay, when we do all this stuff, is it making a difference? Well, by and large, when we did a sort of a crosstab of effectiveness against the resources provided, they said, well, it's very positive with respect to the relationship that we have with the chapter leaders. And we tend to see an improvement in risk mitigation and alignment. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if you're getting together with people in webinars and chapter leadership conferences, you're developing relationships with them. You get to know them, they get to know you. You get to find out, yeah, they're real people, and they find out you're real people too. And you can get along with each other. But then the question is, to what extent is that really improving the quality of their performance? And that's where there was some less than thrilling numbers that came up. And so when we looked at the level of support against critical performance metrics and increasing member value, it seemed like on the surface, everyone seems to get along well, but the chapters are not doing a good enough job serving the member. And that's a real deep question for us to get our heads around, because I mean, if we're doing all this stuff, if you go to the CEO or the COO and say, I need more money to support my chapters, but then you can't really say it's making a positive difference on their performance, where do we sit there? So we're going to come back to this conversation a few times today. But again, we looked at these numbers, and you can see where when we compared effectiveness to the allocation of resources, risk mitigation and alignment were perceived as being most positively affected by the amount or the resources that we were providing to our members and our chapter leaders, whereas increasing overall member value was down there at 36%. So I think that just raises a question. And I'm not saying that's true in all cases, but the whole point of today's conversation is this taking a look at our assumptions and going, is that real or not? And then looking at the questions that are being raised and trying to figure out, okay, where's the value here? And again, we did another little exercise with our data. And again, this is an exercise with data. So we have to review it with a little bit of skepticism, but it does also, again, raise an important question. And that is when we looked at, well, how much do these resources make a difference? And interestingly, we didn't find a change in the perceived effectiveness that correlated with a number of developmental and functional resources that were provided to the chapter leaders. Doing more didn't make them perform better from the CRP perspective. So if we did 10 different things for our chapter leaders, that didn't score much better than if we did 3. So again, that begs the question, are we doing things, are we allocating resources to the support of our chapters that really make a difference? And I don't know the answer to this question because we don't really have good data on it, but it begs the question, before we spend a whole lot more money on more resources for our chapter leaders, let's make sure that they're actually getting them where they need to go so they can be as successful as possible.
So Peter, Anne asks a great question, and I realize we don't have a firm answer on it, but so which interventions make a difference? And I'm just curious. I mean, I know that the data didn't tell us which ones, but if we wanted to figure that out for us in our own organization, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but you tend to look at data and you tend to make connections. So how should we as CRPs begin to figure out what will make a difference?
That's a great question. Anne, do you have an answer?
No.
So I think it all comes down to measurement. And again, part of the struggle that we all have is, and we're going to talk about this more later on, we have what we call a data desert. And until we begin to make some things grow in that data desert, it's going to be hard for us to draw those lines between the action and the outcome in a way that's going to be compelling. I've done a lot of leadership conferences, and I'm sure all of you have done a lot of leadership conferences, and everybody walks out of the room at the end of the conference really excited, saying, wow, that was great. I learned so many wonderful things, and I met so many great people, and I'm gonna knock it out of the park. And then 2 weeks later, crickets.
So I think that the one way to do this is by, if we do really good, and this gets to Peter's data desert conversation, but if you do something, is how are we truly tracking the outcome of that something? You might find out that your leadership conference just makes people feel better. And so maybe you still do that, right?
Right.
But if you want to change, so for example, I'm going to quote Ernest for a moment from INS. He talked about needing to get chapters to accept a technology platform. He found it was best when he did one-on-one, chatting with people. So his time spent one-on-one helping people made a bigger difference than continuing to do big Zoom meetings, right? So take a look at, isolate it. and ask, what's the impact of this? And then you'll be able to, but we don't tend to do a good evaluation. We just say, did you like the food? Was the Zoom okay? Was the time? We're so worried about asking our volunteers, was the time good? Was it Tuesday the best day? Instead of saying, what have you done? And instead of having a dashboard, which we'll talk about tomorrow, which says, did they do anything with this information? So do a little bit of isolation to actually look to see where you're making a difference.
And let me back this up. I'm going to back up just a bit here because I think there's an important point here we don't want to lose. And that is that there's no silver bullet here. There is no one particular resource that's going to make all the difference in the world. I think it's the blend of resources that makes the difference. And as we noted here, that having these programs did change, it made the water warmer. It helped with issues of trust. And trust is really, really important, as you all know, in working with chapters. And we trust people we spend time with. So that's one of the reasons why I think that having conferences and getting people together where we can all see each other and talk to each other is really important. We have to find a way to make sure that we create a conference that not only makes people feel warm and fuzzy, but also gives them some hard skills. So we need to balance those things. And that may be some combination of these conferences with the other tools that we have at hand. There's no one solution. And that's one of the reasons why I'm reluctant to say, do this, don't do that. Because I think you probably need to do several things. We just need to find the right mix, the right blend of things to really work best for our constituency, whoever they may be. So let's take a minute now, and I'm going to ask everybody to hop back into your breakout rooms. Let's say for 5-10 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes tops. But I want you to just talk to each other about your chapter support and share with each other what you think is making a big difference. And why you feel it is, or perhaps something that you're not confident is making a big difference and wondering why not. Sarah?
Yep, on it.
I've noticed that a lot more people do not have their video on. I think everybody's getting pretty tired of being visible.
I think so too. You always have to look on if you've got your video on. It's hard.
Welcome back, everybody.
We had fun, and by the way, thank you so much for those drinks. Those were like awesome in our breakout room.
How come I wasn't in that room?
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I was kind of looking for some
that
chocolates.
is.
Okay, let's just take Shelley. Was that the drink? Okay, so let's just take just a couple minutes here. Anybody have any aha moment or an ouch moment or anything they want to share?
I think I got my gut feeling confirmed. I work for an association for fire protection engineers, and I started not too long ago. And they have, the headquarters developed this policy against promoting local chapter events, which I always thought is detrimental to any relationship with chapters.
Mhm.
My counterparts from my breakout room confirmed that that's very unfortunate. So this is something I will have to take as a goal and talk to the board to take a second look at that. That's how can you talk about good relationship like if you don't even want to acknowledge someone else has events at all. They call you call them partners. That just doesn't gel together for me.
Good point. Good point.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment one thing. I've been with CAI for a number of years and in my current role for about 14. And a comment I just thought of as I was talking in the breakout room is the approach that we've taken in the past 2 years to meet with our chapters regularly via Zoom has increased the relationships tenfold over those first 12 years that I've been in this role. Because we're seeing people more regularly, even though it's not in person. We used to see, like you said, that once a year, that chapter leadership training that's a conference and you're doing 12 million other things and you can't focus on people. We're focusing for like 45 minutes every few weeks on these chapter leaders. And it's been game changing with our relationship and our trust with our leaders.
It's a great
And you guys, Crystal, you guys do a really cool thing when you bring people in, back in the day at least, where you had them come into the staff and sit down in each of the staff's rooms and talk about it. And that was the comment that we made in our breakout too, was this intentional conversations, like that's the power.
Absolutely.
And I think the one lesson we have all learned in the last 2 years is that there are a lot of people who will not get in a car or on a train or in a plane. They're not going to go someplace. But if you create a portal through which they can see you and you can see them and they can see others and they can begin to see that they're part of something bigger, that's what a conference does. It helps you feel like you're part of a larger entity. Whereas if you're working in a box and in isolation all the time, you never get that sense. And I think that we've learned with Zoom that you can't replicate it entirely, but you can begin to create that feeling. And I think, Crystal, that feeling is the most important part of what happens at a conference that is so important to trust.
Yeah,
Okay.
We've seen deeper relationships between chapter executive directors and between chapter presidents that would have never happened without Zoom. So it's been amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So we are going to keep rocking and rolling here. Because we've got about 15 minutes left and I've got a bunch of stuff to cover. So get ready for a fire hose, kind of, sort of. So this all comes back to this question of how do you know? How do you know? And we asked the CRPs in the survey, what are you measuring? What are the things that you're counting? And we saw things being counted that we expect to see being counted. And I apologize for this chart, but it is what it is. They're counting membership recruitment. They're counting membership retention, right? Those are things that we expect to be counted. They're not counting so much local member penetration. And that's probably an important number to count. A lot of people are somewhat afraid of that number, not only at the chapter level, but sometimes at the national level. But more importantly, we looked at what they're counting, but we said, well, how do you know that the number that you have is real? How do you know that's a real number? What's the basis? That's the source of your data. Well, here's where we get into the fuzzy part, because we find that by and large, people are relying very heavily on anecdotal reports and on chapter leaders for their information. And I don't want to disparage chapter leaders in any way, shape, or form, but they're chapter leaders and they believe in their chapters. And if you ask them, how is my chapter doing? They're going to say, it's doing great. I was at a meeting and all my friends were there. Well, yeah, but there's a dearth of objective, valid, reliable data that tells us what's going on. And as you will hear me say over and over again, and you'll say, Peter, shut up, but the plural of anecdote is not data. And we cannot make good decisions about resource allocation unless we have good data. So that's a thing that we need to find a way to fix. So let's keep this going now, because we're going to come back to this a little bit. And this year we talked to chapter leaders. And we asked them, what do you think about the world in which you operate? And we had 710 chapter leaders from 471 chapters representing 7 associations that took part in this survey. So the 7 associations is kind of a small number, but the 710 chapter leaders probably are fairly reflective of the chapter leader population generally. And so we asked them a question about, well, what gives you satisfaction in your role as a chapter leader? And that what's in it for me came up with a couple of things that we wouldn't be surprised about. It helps me build my network. I'm really enjoying the experience, and it's helping me develop leadership skills. And this is important because, as Peggy and I discovered in our mutually beneficial research, volunteering research done for ASAE several years ago, mutual benefit is important, right? It's got to be a win-win. And this is where there's an opportunity for us to help people develop skills and talents that perhaps they hadn't before. But we also asked them, well, how are you doing with respect to what's in it for the members? And here's where they said things like, it's helping me raise awareness within my profession about the value of our chapter and our association. And it's helping my peers and colleagues improve their skills. And that's really, we talked about education advocacy, and that's what the chapters and the association by and large are all about. So these are all what I would consider good things for the organization and reflect well on the chapter leaders and their broad focus. We did ask them about the extent to which they felt their chapter was able to deliver good member service. And they had fairly high satisfaction with their ability to deliver educational and technical programs. They weren't as excited about their ability to provide sufficient networking. And I will caution here, because obviously this survey was done when? Oh, in 2021. And there was this pandemic thing going on that you might have all heard about. Yeah, and that probably affected chapter's ability to do any kind of real traditional networking at all. But then we also asked them, and no surprise here, about the level of member engagement. And this matches up perfectly with the experience that Peggy and I have had over the last 20 years and every bit of research we've ever seen. 10% of the chapter members are highly engaged. 33% or a third are somewhat or marginally engaged. They come to some meetings. 47% are unengaged. And 65% of the chapter leaders said the shortage of qualified volunteers is a significant issue. So again, all we're doing is affirming, I think, what we knew, but now we've got the chapter leaders saying, by the way, what you thought you know, well, we agree, it's a problem. We need to find a way to fix it. In fact, when they looked at their board, they found only 21% of the board seats were filled with a wait list. So less than, or roughly a fifth. Half of the chapters were struggling to fill seats, and they recognize we really need to re-examine the volunteer system. Again, Einstein's definition of insanity. We keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and we're not getting it, and we're not going to get it. We need to really stop doing what we were doing and try to do something a little different here. We may try some things that don't work, but we need to try some things that are different. Now, one of the things that was encouraging about the chapter leader response was their perception of their relationship with the headquarters. And overall, they were pretty positive. I mean, it was 49% of them thought it was a very strong relationship, and 43% thought it was very good, and only 1% thought it was dysfunctional. And that's a pretty positive number. It reflects well on the 7 associations that participated, and I hope you guys have a similar experience with your volunteers. We also asked them, should the chapters be independent from headquarters or a competitor with, or is it a competitor with headquarters? And very few thought that was true. Most agreed that the chapter is a partner with headquarters, and the chapter leaders trust headquarters. And most agree that and big surprise here, the chapter is run by effective leaders and should be a high priority for headquarters. So there's a sort of a self-serving perception there on the part of the chapter leaders that, again, when we talk about the farm team paradox, do they bring that perspective to the board when they become a member of the national board? Do they say, our chapters are run by effective leaders and we need to support them more? Well, that's a question. We also asked them, what do they think of the resources that are being provided by the Headquarters Association? And by and large, no surprises here. They like the conferences, they like the website portal, they like the training webinars. They, by and large, those were things they found some value in. They also appreciated, but not quite as much, the functional resources that we provide to them. And I think this also, again, reflects the desire for a personal relationship, just not just a technical relationship between the chapter and the headquarters. And I think that goes back to and what Crystal was saying about those relationships that are being created when you have that conference. This is really important because these are people. They are human beings. They're social animals. They want to get around each other. And chapter leaders, by and large, are get in the car and go someplace kind of people. They're not necessarily the people who just want to do something on Zoom. So a conference is going to be of a high value to them. But I think what you'll find, and you've probably already seen this with your associations, is that that's not the majority of association members. The majority of association members don't want to get in a car and go drive someplace or get in a train or a plane. So chapter leaders, they give a fairly reasonable thumbs up to the world. Now we talk to the CEOs. Now, these are the people that you're probably most interested in with respect to their perspective. Jeff DeCania and I conducted 2 CEO roundtables, and we also did a survey of CEOs. And we tried to explore their orthodox beliefs. And the orthodox beliefs are those beliefs that sort of exist out there, but we're not really sure of the extent to which those beliefs are based in reality or just, I've always done it this way. And so when we talk to the CEOs, we found that, by and large, they agree that the chapters are an important local resource channel. They can be a membership engagement channel. They can be a leadership development channel. But the CEOs, by and large, were skeptical of whether chapters are worth the effort. And I think from your perspective in the CRP seat, you need to think about that. Is your CEO skeptical of the value of the chapters? Because that's going to determine the extent to which that CEO is going to be willing to allocate more resources to the support of the chapters. By and large, the CEOs agree that the chapters are often too small to succeed and too large to fail. They didn't really agree that chapters to deliver the bulk of the association's value to the members. And this is a really important concept we'll talk about more tomorrow, but this notion of helping the chapters and the organization see this whole ecosystem and how the parts should play well together. And by working together, they can get a lot more done than they can separately. And we tend to have this us then, the siloed effect that we often see with chapter systems where they're off doing their thing. In many cases, CEOs think they're those chapter things and they're those chapter people. They're down the hall. I walk by their offices every now and then and I say hi. I know they're there. I'm not really sure what they do, but that's okay because it doesn't cost us that much and we've been doing it forever, so we're just going to keep doing it. One CEO made a comment that we put here because I think it's emblematic of the perception, and that is that 1/3 of our members love the chapters, 1/3 of our members hate the chapters, and 1/3 asks, "What's a chapter?" And I'm sure that's not that's not at all very different from what you guys have seen in working with your members. And this is the important point here. Too often the chapter leaders want to be everything to everybody. And Peggy and I will constantly tell them, no, you can't be everything to everybody. Be the best thing you can to the people for whom you can make a difference. And that may only be 1/3 of the members. And that's okay. That's okay. So then we talked to the CEOs about chapter value, and we really wanted to understand, how do they know? And so we come to this problem of they also recognize that that the association mostly relies on self-reporting from our chapters to assess their performance. And they agreed far less in this question of agreement that we have an objective data-driven process by which we assess the performance of our chapters. So the real lesson is that fuzzy metrics and the data desert lead to uncertainty. And uncertainty is not good for anybody, especially if you're asking them for money. So if you want to get more money from your CEO, we need to find a way to get more certainty. So when you go and say, if I do this, if I allocate X number of dollars to this effort, whatever it may be, I'm going to get this much of a result. That's going to get people excited. So when we asked the CEOs about the impact of the chapters, it was interesting that they felt that chapters have a significant representation on their board of directors. But almost contradictory, they said they did not agree that chapters have an outsized influence on headquarters decision-making. And this always puzzles me because and Peggy and I have sat in board meetings before with associations where there are a number of chapter leaders who came up through the ranks. And you invariably hear that they have a hard time taking off their chapter leader hat and putting on their member hat and their association hat when they're making a decision for the association. And this is an important element of the volunteer development process we have to address. So when we look at all these things in aggregate, we have a lot of lessons learned here. And the lessons learned really start with, there's a general agreement that there's a legitimate need for a local presence. I don't think there's anybody questioning that at the CEO level, at the CRP level, or the chapter leader level. We all agree it makes sense for us to have a local presence of some way, shape, or form, because we need that for networking, education, advocacy, career development, all these other fun things. But we have really mixed views and differing perceptions about the influence and the purpose and the value of those chapters. And I think we need to get a little more clarity there and some consistency around those views. And we need to take a hard look at the headquarters support that we're providing, because that costs money, that takes time. And we want to make sure when we're spending our time, and quite frankly, when we're spending the volunteers' time, we want to spend that time well. Let's work with the volunteers and have them do things and have us do things that ultimately will move the mission and serve the members. And then, lack of data. That's an issue we need to fix. And we'll talk about some ways that perhaps we can address that in more detail tomorrow. And last but not least, we need to employ technology. We've learned a lot about technology this year, and there's some really cool tools out there that can let us do things that we never thought we could do before, not just to help us get more data, but more importantly, to help address this chapter leader turnover problem. Let's see if we can create a system where our volunteer leaders can focus on what's truly important. And quite frankly, the reason why they got into this game in the first place, and that is not to do administrative stuff, but to serve our members and serve our mission. So, question for everybody. What might you do with the data and ideas we explored today? And I'm not asking for an answer right now, but I'm asking you to sit down after this thing is over and make some notes. Think about, what am I going to do differently? And more importantly, what don't I know that I need to find out, that I need to figure out how I can learn? What's out there that the data, not just the data, but the information I need to better understand how I can help our chapters be more effective than they are today, or actually figure out, are they effective? And maybe they're more effective than we think. We just don't know. So we encourage you to join us tomorrow, because we're going to talk about tapping into the power of dashboards and really how to build a dashboard. We're not going to build dashboards per se. We're really going to talk about all the pieces that should go into a dashboard. So that's my story for now. And I'm going to turn the microphone back over to my boss, Peggy, actually, I'm not sure who's going to cover this one, but I'm going to cover that one. Go ahead, tap it right on through. Yes, indeed.
Thank you for coming. This is the data part. The next 2 days, we're going to play with this stuff. And so just want you to think about the fact that some of this stuff, Peter asked the question, what do I need to know that I need to figure out how to learn? And the reality is that your team here of Billhighway and Mariner, if you have any questions, need any help in understanding some of this stuff, we're more than happy to. But I want to give us, I want to tee up tomorrow for us. So keep putting through, Peter. Okay.
Well,
we are looking for feedback from you on today. So feel free to, in the chat or an email, tell us what was confusing or what worked for you, because when we come back tomorrow, we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to talk about what is that data that we can get, should be able to get, need to figure out how to get, and how do we put that in a dashboard that allows us to really, I'm going to call this, begin to look at to tell the story, right? So please plan to come back tomorrow. You're going to use the same link that you used today. If you cannot find it, please feel free to ping Sarah. She's put that email in the chat a couple of times. We are going to make sure that this, after these 3 days are over, you're going to get a full set of slide decks. You're going to get a link to the video, and hold your seats. We're going to send you your very own copy of the detailed report. So you will get all of this. Those 7 incredible groups that had us go out to their chapter leaders are going to get their own individual report as well. So let us know what was confusing. I know we went through some things fast, so we'll go over those things again tomorrow. Not a problem. Meanwhile, get back to the desk. Maybe hang up here and call a chapter leader and have a conversation. Maybe it's beginning about the relationship. All righty, getting to the last slide. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you.